Καλησπέρα σε όσους μας παρακολουθούν διαδικτυακά. Καλησπέρα σε όλους τους εκλεκτούς καλεσμένους.
Good evening, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. We will have a discussion today regarding war reparations. And it is an issue that has come to the limelight after a lot of court decision actually justifying the war victims. And today we are going to talk about the politics of the German war reparations to Greece. We will have the first speaker, Ioannis Stathas, Mayor of Distomo, Arachova, Antikyra. Then we will have Fanny Spanos, Regional Governor of Central Greece. Athanasios Papadopoulos, Mayor of Calabrica, President of Network of Martyred Cities and Villages. Mr. Marco De Paulis, General Military Prosecutor of the Military Court of Appeal. Mrs. Heineke Hansel, member of the German Bundestag der Linke Party. Mr. Miltiadis Sfundounis, lawyer, member of Association of the Relatives of Distomo Massacre victims. Before each of the speakers takes the floor, we will have a short CV and each speaker has only 15 minutes available for communicating their topic. So, Mr. Stathas, you are the first speaker. You have the floor. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon once again. Today is a special day for us. It's a special day for us. We have organized a conference for the first time regarding the victims of the massacre. Of course, we wanted to have a conference live, but unfortunately, because of the COVID issues, we organized that via the internet. Nevertheless, we have a lot of participants here who also are here to talk to us about what Nazism means, because we must never forget, because people who forget are very likely to experience the same events again and again in the future. So we are here to remind everyone what massacre is. And it is a remembrance day for all of us. Of course, these massacres did not take place only in Greece. We have in Yugoslavia, in Italy, Norway. These are war crimes committed by the Nazis, and they should never take place again. Of course, a lot of stories are likely to be repeated, but as long as memory stays live, I think that we have a chance of avoiding it. And still, we have far-right parties coming in the limelight again in Europe and elsewhere, supporting their views, being against the vulnerable, the weak, and those who cannot deal with their own theories, and they believe that these people who are not compatible with what they believe should vanish. And we see in Greece far-right left, like Golden Dawn, far-right parties, excuse me, like Golden Dawn, being at a rise in Greece, especially in the past years. And we see people voting for them. But we are here to remember and remind everyone what it means to be a Nazi. We have our grandparents who have suffered massacres all in the past years. And I think all of us who are here have some ancestors, grandparents who have experienced the cruelty of the Nazi party. What is the most important of all is that Germany has not paid for all these crimes committed by the Nazis. What does it mean that in Germany everybody is against paying for the crimes committed by the Nazis? And of course, we see that there are parties and political power that do support our cause. And the Linke is one of these parties. In November 2019, we have organized a day, they have organized a day conference, and we had the speaker of the party, Heike, who helped us a lot. We had participants from various political forces, the Greens and other parties. And of course, representatives from Mrs. Merkel's party. There were people there who believe in our cause. They believe that the victims should have a fair reparation. And for us, it's not the money that we are eager about. Because irrespective of the amount one might pay, the massacre will never be forgotten. I think that it is a symbolic gesture showing that people who commit crimes cannot escape or evade punishment. And in Distomo now, even though we have courts that have ruled in favor of the victims, nevertheless, these decisions have not been recognized by the government. And in order for the case to actually have a favorable outcome, the Minister of Justice should put a signature on the decision. Nevertheless, that has not happened yet. We have decisions in Hague in 2011, and now we are trying once again. I think that we will have a favorable outcome. Nevertheless, it's not only a political aspect, it's a moral aspect above all. We have a lot of supporters in our cause, and we have a lot of people supporting us, and above all, we want to keep the memory alive. We want our society to remember the atrocities of the past and pave a new way towards justice and fairness. This is what we have been trying to do all this year as a local authority. And we have organized this conference to talk about human rights and above all to remember what atrocities are. And nowadays, we do have examples of people being massacred around the world, young children, babies killed. And this is the blood of innocent people. And we believe that the more people are aware about the atrocities, the less atrocities will take place. We have the court decisions justifying us, and we have also another characteristic. We are a Holocaust. We have preserved all the remains of the massacred people. And we have been trying via the preservation of the massacre victims' remains to bring memory back. We have, for example, a pregnant woman who was killed, and the bones of the baby were found in her. By reading the remains of the victims, we learn about our stories, and that will help us rewrite the history in a fair way for those victims. Before I rest my case, I want to say that we are more than eager to continue this struggle. These are days of remembrance for us, especially in a couple of days. It is the anniversary of the Distomo massacre, and we are all there to remember them, the descendants of those people, to pay homage to the dead, and of course. I have been remembering all these days of the past year, women in black going to the monument of the victims, paying homage to the dead. And I've been remembering that since my childhood. It is part of my...
Αυτό μας δίνει όμως και δύναμη ώστε να μπορέσουμε να μείνουμε όρθιοι και να αγωνιζόμαστε για μια καλύτερη κοινωνία, για μια δίκαιη κοινωνία, χωρίς να υπάρχουν αυτές οι κοινωνικές αδικίες, που αν δεν υπάρχουν αυτές οι κοινωνικές αδικίες δεν μπορεί να βρουν και έδαφος, να βρουν και έδαφος τέτοιες ιδεολογίες και τέτοια, να μην τα χαρακτηρίσω, όπως είναι ο ναζισμός και ο φασισμός. Από μένα, Φέη, δεν θα πω κάτι άλλο.
That is what I wanted to share with you. I would like to welcome to this meeting Mr. Marco De Paulis. It is very important for us to have him here with us. And I think that the decision that was taken in Italy is of paramount importance to us, because it shows that justice is there and people can hope for justice, and there is hope. That is what I wanted to share with you. If you need anything, I will be always at your disposal, and I wish you all the best. And I am very proud that I have Mr. De Paulis, Heike Hansel with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Fathas, what you have described about the bones and the remains of the victims was very touching. And you said that by studying the remains, we can rewrite the history again. And I would like to say that I come from a family from Distomo, but we were very lucky to have no victims. And I have a narrative from my parents of my mother when she was 2 years old, and she could remember she could remember saying that all the children were hidden behind a big barrel in the warehouse. The Germans were there. They put fire all around, and they could actually, the neighborhoods would rush in, save the children. And my mother back then could remember that at the age of 2, a narrative which was inscribed in her soul. And now we need to go back to Mr. Spanos, who is the regional governor of Central Greece. Mr. Spanos is a politician and a regional governor of Central Greece since 2019. He's been a regional governor of Evia in the past. He studied civil engineering and studied in London. Mr. Spanos, you've got the floor.
Καλησπέρα σε όλους και ευχαριστώ πολύ.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Thank you very much for this invitation. Dear Mayor, usually in this kind of events, we say congratulations, but it's very difficult to say everything that involves happiness when talking about the Distomo massacre and the Nazi crimes. Let me start by saying that when in the first days of my involvement with the regional authorities, two things happened. The first one was my discussion with the former regional head of the region, Mr. Bakoyannis, about the Distomo case, in which discussion he shared with me the progress of the case, the legal case, I mean, because I should know as the new head of the region about the state of affairs with the case, and it was something really impressive. I mean, both the case itself, the history behind the Distomo massacre, and the legal aspect and the progress of the case in court. The second was my first visit in Distomo. In which I met neither happy people or, let's say, not hospitable people. I just met some people who were very melancholic. Mayor Stathas explained to me then that this melancholy is something you can find in all districts, in all neighborhoods, in every single house of Distomo as a result of this atrocity of the past. So the conclusion I reached was that the issue of war reparations is both financial and not non-financial. Residents of Distomo are not well off, but for them, it's not about money. It's not about the pecuniary, let's say, benefit out of this legal case. First and foremost, we're talking about the ethical, the moral, let's say, reparation and the moral aspect of the case, because each one of them would like to have been raised not an orphan, which cannot be remedied right now. But in order for them to appease their suffering in their soul, the only thing that could do that was to have the war reparations and the case tried in favor of our cause. That's why, together with former head Mr. Bakoyannis, former heads Georgadas and others, I decided to stand by them and, of course, to stand by Mayor Stathas in his efforts. That's why, in collaboration with them and in collaboration with the legal experts that are on the case, Mr. Lau and his team, we are working step by step towards this direction. Although someone non-legal expert like myself would say spontaneously that the case is about to reach an end, since we have a final resolution by the court, and we also have the decision taken by the Italian justice that now may be executed. So we have quite a few positive, let's say, tools at our disposal. But because of the complexity of the case, there is a long way ahead because, of course, now the way ahead is not as long as in the past, but it's equally demanding, equally difficult. So, because there are a lot of aspects in this case, a lot of implications out of this case, so we have to be very, very careful. I think that I think that this effort of ours is one of the most important and one of the most low-key ones, for reasons which I don't have to argument in favor of. We are very low profile about that. There are some major issues with Mr. Spanos' connection. We failed to follow his contribution. So he resumes that there are a lot of people, a lot of institutions involved, namely the states, the judicial system, etc. And there's a complexity with respect to the facts that pertain to this case and the let's say, ambitions or the expectations nurtured within the residents of Distomo about the case. So I have to be crystal clear in this discussion that no one out of the people involved and concerned with the legal case of the war operations to Greece, and in particular towards Distomo, no one is a chauvinist or someone who no one who's bigoted, let's say, against the German people. That's not the point. I would say it's exactly the opposite. We believe that execution of the court ruling and the disbursement of the reparations, the compensation, will be the highest honor ever received by the German people, and as such, we will welcome it. Let me say that in my memory, I have the picture of Manolis Glezos, late Manolis Glezos, who did what nobody else had the right to do, most likely. It was something that only he had the right to do. He took the German ambassador from the hand, and together they placed the wreath at the memorial of the Distomo victims. This is the philosophy, this is our approach, and this is the kind of philosophy that all our efforts have to be governed by. So we believe that a positive end in this case will provide us with security of law, relief, and a very loud message in favor of democracy, freedom, respect towards our fellow humans. And even more, as the mayor rightly said, and because that's part of law itself, it will offer a teaching, a lesson for the future, that these atrocities, these crimes, are not to be forgotten in the memory. We still have a major issue with the sound. The head of the region said that these crimes have to be punished. So without further ado, let me just reiterate the importance, the institutional importance of this conference, and of course our undivided and warm support to this huge struggle by the residents of Distomo for this case of global proportions. Ending, dear Mrs. Mavragani, dear friends, in the coming period, we will be able to gladly materialize the initiative proposed by the mayor. I'm talking about the upgrading of the Museum of Victims of the Nazi, a museum designed and funded by the municipality. The construction of it will be taken over by the regional authorities. It's the minimum we can do, but I think it's quite substantial. It's a legacy to honor the memory of those people lost and a way to provide relief to their descendants.
Στο πλαίσιο το συνολικό.
And of course, this is, let's say, incorporated in the full spectrum of our efforts in order to keep these important moments of the past alive in our memory. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you the best for your conference. Thank you very much, Mr. Spanos. What you said was really amazing, that the upgrade of the museum will be funded by the region. And if you remember, Yannis, this building used to be our elementary school in the past, right? So it's great to have such a building echoing the memories of the past. Moving on to Mr. Athanasios Papadopoulos, the mayor of Kalavrita and the president of the network of martyred cities and villages, 1940-1945. Mr. Papadopoulos, a Greek politician, an MP from 2009 to 2012, the current mayor of Kalavrita. He's a graduate from the Economic University. He used to be the president of the Museum of the Holocaust in Kalavrita, and he is the president of the network of martyred cities and villages. Dear Mayor, there is a common thread between Distomo and Kalavrita, so I think you're absolutely the right person to discuss about that. So you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mrs. Mavragani. Yes, we are connected via a shared pain, the same pain, because we come from martyred cities and villages, 110, all of them in Greece, and the network was introduced in Kalavrita at around 2000. And we created this network of martyred cities and villages of Greece with the assistance of Manolis Glezos and, of course, the National Council for War Reparations. The aim of this network is to keep memory alive via the creation of museums in all martyred cities and villages. And I was glad to hear the regional governor that the region will include the upgrading of the museum in their programs. And of course, we fight for the reparations. And of course, we are always in cooperation with the National Council for War Reparations. I want to greet you all today and wish you all the best with the conference. I think it is a long conference and a rather fruitful one that will finish before the day of remembrance, 77 years ago. And I would like to greet all the participants in this session, especially the regional governor, the mayor of Distomo, and the vice president of the martyred cities and villages for his struggle until today. And of course, I need to greet Marco De Paulis for being here, General Military Prosecutor of Rome. And of course, I need to greet and underline the participation of Mrs. Heike Hansel from the Linke Party. And of course, Miltiadis Spundouris, lawyer, member of the Association of the Relatives of the Distomo Massacre victims. I would like to refer to this topic, a crime without punishment. And I would like, ladies and gentlemen, friends, to allow me, by taking into consideration the title of this conference, a crime without punishment, and say that every crime without a punishment might be repeated in the future, in another area, in some other country, with some other perpetrator, but with the same or even worse consequences. Along with Calabria and other martyr cities in Europe and in the world are linked with these crimes of the past, the Nazi crimes, are not considered something that has passed, but are omnipresent and quite live in the memory of all those people who have suffered and their descendants. This is our task. This is our duty, to keep this memory alive, and we need to disseminate this memory to others. We must never forget, because I never forget needs to have a meaning. I would like to thank the municipality of Distomo, Arachova, and Antikira, and especially the mayor, Mr. Stathas, for his invitation, because this 4-day conference is of paramount importance, because through its session and the speaker is here to talk about the memory, our obligations, and punishment and crimes and punishment. 77 years after the massacre of Distomo, almost 78 years from the Holocaust in Calabria. Today, Yannis, that in Distomo and Calabria, those people who have experienced these massacres are about to vanish. They are very old. And those who died because they were massacred, executed, and some of them who died in Kortiati, burned in the furnaces there. But those who survived are now old. They grew old, and they are about to leave this world. And now the obligation lies with us to keep their memory alive and convey these memories to our descendants. We have the obligation to communicate all these memories to our children and grandchildren. 77 years later, the historical burden of that event has the profile of a global prosecution. It is a crime against humanity, democracy, and human rights. It is against every human rationale. And irrespective of the era it took place, is unacceptable. And I believe this is important. It is important to our memory. It is a crime without punishment. It is a crime that is not does not have a fair outcome, because since it's not officially recognized by Germany, it spreads the message that cruelty can perpetuate in the future, because since in the past the perpetrator did something and did not have any punishment for his actions, that means that any perpetrator now and in the future can do the same without expecting any punishment. And where is ethics? Where is justice here? We are here, nevertheless, to remind everyone that democracy and justice are omnipresent. We are here to have our voices raised and ask for a fair outcome. And we want all of us to bring our voices together and ask for this war reparation. 2 months ago, on the 30th of March, I participated in a similar internet event. Yanis was also there. A year from the death of Manolis Glezos. Manolis was a friend, was a symbol and a global personality, representing a hero himself and a fighter from the day one until the end of his life. He had visited all these martyred cities, Distomo, Calabrita, and he would always say that war reparation is not a good term. Reparation is a notion that actually refers to a crime that took place at a specific time period. But he talked about debt, because debt is not a timely notion. It is something that started in the past and remains in the present. And I think that this notion of debt is omnipresent, not only in Calabrita, but in every corner of Greece and Europe, where these massacres took place by the Nazis. Manolis always talked about debts, and on this basis, he would struggle. He talked about the debt and the loans that the Greeks were obliged to take, the looting of the antiquities, and the decision of Paris of 1946, an obligation of all in Europe, war reparations that were decided in the French capital. And since we talk about memory and obligation today, we have another responsibility to continue and bring justice in the limelight. And we need actually to keep the memory of Manolis Glezos alive, trying to have a favorable outcome and have this crime punished. The notion of rule of law obliges us to recognize that some steps of recognition have taken place. Some small steps encouraging on the part of Germany. On the one hand, Germany supports that there is no legal obligation towards Greece, and the system, in a vague way, and have found a solution. The comments are up to you, and I won't make any further comments myself. And I just say that since the reparations still remain pending in the German parliament, as Deutsche Welle announced lately on the 25th of March, it shows that there are powers that actually coincide with our points of view regarding war reparations. There are powers in Germany that actually see the truth, and they actually serve this dimension of justice, and they are there to remind other people of Germany that all crimes, more or less, should be punished. And I think that redemption will come for Germany when they recognize these war reparations to the victims of the massacre. And I believe that not only as a mayor, but as a descendant of victims. My mother was a victim back in the past. Her three brothers, 17, 19, and 27 years old, and she also lost her father. So my mother, in a way, was a victim, having lost her families, and being a mayor of Calavrita and the Holocaust of December of 1943 was characterized as one of the most atrocious crimes of the past. That is why the network of martyred cities and villages is a network trying to keep the memory alive in cooperation with the War Reparations Council of Greece. The claims of ours are still pending, and of course, they cannot be cancelled, annihilated, and they cannot, and no one can compromise with them. And this is another message that we should send from this conference towards all directions. That the cornerstone in a friendship and cooperation between two countries is mutual respect. It is justice. It is historical memory, and the pending issues that should be settled coming from the past. And the issue of war reparation is not open, but timely, as the first time it was claimed by Greece. We all know where we should insist and what our obligation is. We should always serve our duty until we are fully justified. Thank you, Mayor. You were moved, and you moved us as well. When you described the Calavrita and Distomo, you helped us see some pictures, and I keep in mind the two were death and responsibility. Yes. The few who are still alive will be very happy to experience that and are
Είναι ο Dr. Μάρκο Ντεπάολης, στρατιωτικός δικαστής από το 1988.
Speaker is Mr. Marco De Paulis. At the beginning, he was the top prosecutor in La Spezia and then in Rome. Since 2018, he is the general military prosecutor. Apologies. Let me share with you a few things about the role he has played and the topic at hand. Since 2008 until 2012, he was the president of the National Military Judges Association. He was a professor of law for many years, international law, criminal law. He has published many articles on issues of war crimes and others. Since 2002 until 2018, he carried out an investigation on the crimes by Italian forces against Italians during the Second World War and against Italian members of the military after September of that year. Of course, amongst the various crimes of the Nazi and the fascists that he investigated was the Santa Anna massacre in Marciaboto and in Cephalonia. So having full knowledge of the cases, fully, and of course with respect to the crimes committed by the Italian forces during the Second World War. With this philosophy and with this approach, he started investigating all these cases. He has been awarded many, many times in the past, and I think it's very important to have his contribution in today's, Mr. De Paulis. So what can we still fight for after all these years, and what are we to expect from the Distomo at Calavrita and in other villages that have suffered so much after the German atrocities? Hello from Athens, from Greece.
Good evening. First of all, I wish to thank the municipality of Distomo and the conference organizers for having invited me to participate in this interesting discussion. Thank you very much. For me is an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. As an Italian military prosecutor, I bring here the judicial experience of a country, Italy, that has suffered together with Greece the atrocities and the brutality of Nazis during the Second World War. I don't forget anyway that my own country, only a few months ago to be illegally occupied by Nazis, had illegally occupied Greece, perpetrating many crimes on Greek civilian population. Exactly the same crimes committed by Nazis in Greece, in Italy, and in Europe. The massacre of Domenicon in Thessaly is a concrete example. And indeed, it's also one of the massacres of which, as military prosecutor, I have investigated some years ago. I think that the first question to ask in our discussion is why today, after 77 years, we still talk about Distomo? Why we still talk about Nazi massacres in Europe? Evidently, there is an unsolved issue. It's true, there is an unsolved issue. The unsolved issue is the compensation to the victims. Actually, at least as far as Italy, even before the compensation to the victims, there was the problem, the big dilemma of the missed, denied penal justice. In Italy, there is an anomaly. Justice for these crimes was virtually absent. Only a small number of trials were held, mostly after incredible delays between 1996 and 2013. I mean, only more than 50 years after the fulfillment of the crimes, some trial for massacre committed by Nazis was celebrated. However, most of the crimes remained unpunished. It was probably for political reasons that military justice could not deal with Nazi war criminals. In 1960, in fact, something peculiar happened. The military general attorney took a decision that had no justification under the Italian legal system. In other words, an unlawful act. He decided to temporarily set aside hundreds of proceedings involving war crimes. In this way, he impeded the related criminal investigations, which would otherwise have been mandatory. This was an unlawful concealment, as was subsequently affirmed by several committees of inquiry that dealt with the case. Hence, in Italy, for a considerable time, these war crimes were not addressed at all. Then, in 1994, almost 35 years later, the files were discovered by change and military justice resumed its course. To give you an idea of the proportions of the facts we are talking about, I will tell you that in Italy, after the armistice of 8 September 1943 and until the end of Nazi occupation in April-May 1945, there were more than 25,000 million civilian casualties in approximately 4,000 criminal acts. Meanwhile, abroad, there were more than 8,000 Italian military victims that were prisoners of war killed by Nazi criminal act. Among the best-known episodes, let me recall the massacre of Marzabotto Montesole, around 800 civilian victims, including 215 children, and that of Sant'Anna di Stazzema, roughly 560 civilian victims, including 110 children. The other massacres, which took place outside Italy, in Greece, Albania, Poland, and Germany, against Italian soldiers who were prisoners of war, numbered around more than 100. In response to this number, there were few trials, approximately 15 trials right after the war between 1947 and 1952, and 24 between 1994 and 2013. As a military prosecutor, I personally prosecuted 17 of the 24 investigating the crimes and trying them in court. These trials brought out a number of significant questions of law. The first key element is the absence of a statute of limitations for war crimes. Based on this principle, those responsible for serious war crimes and crimes against humanity may be prosecuted and punished as long as they live. The importance of this principle is essential. We must consider that there is no statute of limitation on the damage caused to the victim and their families. As a public prosecutor, I have questioned hundreds of Nazi and injured parties, that is to say the survivors of the massacres and the relatives of the victims. I was struck by the difference in their lives. On one end, there is the perpetrator, who has generally suffered no consequence for the crimes committed. He was able to lead a normal life, no one ever having held him accountable for his crimes. On the other hand, there are the victims and survivors, people who had an extremely difficult time of it, their lives destroyed, forever altered. Therefore, we must never lose sight of the reason why, even 60 or 70 years after the fact, it is so fundamentally right to find the criminals responsible for this atrocity and make them stand trial. This is not harassment. This is merely the due exercise of justice. And another important principle that has emerged in the trials is that of a changed approach to the execution of a superior's unlawful orders. Now it's necessary to seek out, investigate, and punish all those who contributed materially to those massacres, regardless of their military rank, not more only the commanders. The results achieved have been extraordinary, especially when compared to the previous accomplishments of the Italian military courts. Suffice it to say that in the period observed, 2003-2013, 80 defendants were indicted, compared to the 12 trials in the immediate aftermath of the war, and 56 life sentences were handed down. Another relevant aspect is the role that the victims of the crime played in these trials. The survivors and the relatives of the victims joined the proceeding as civil plaintiffs, either individually or in association. Besides the possibility of actually enforcing the sentence, what was crucial for the civil plaintiffs, for the families of the victims, was the judicial determination of what had happened, as well as the affirmation of culpability for the perpetrators. And another aspect deserves mention: the possibility of holding foreign states liable under civil war, jointly and severally with the defendants, for compensation of damages caused by war crimes. In 2006, for the first time in the history of Italian case law, at the request of several civil plaintiffs, a foreign state, in this case the Federal Republic of Germany, was sued and found liable under civil law for damages caused by war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by its former military personnel. This is a novelty in the field of military justice that is of great historical as well as legal significance. For the first time, a judicial body has acknowledged national jurisdiction in matters concerning a claim for compensation submitted to the criminal court against a foreign state for damages caused to the civilian population by the crimes against humanity committed by the military of the state. Thus, in such case, the principle of international law, whereby states are immune from the jurisdiction of another state, no longer applies. And this in the name of a higher principle, safeguarding the rights of the victims of war crimes. This point has been upheld by Italy's highest court, and in a short period of time, it has become an established principle of case law. However, this line of action was halted in 2012 by the decision of the International Court of Justice in The Hague, to which Germany had appealed. At present, the issue still remains at the center of debate, as the Constitutional Court has violated the law enacted by the Italian Parliament to enforce the sentence of the International Court of Justice. Nevertheless, the attempt would seem to have a future in international case law, since it is certainly more in keeping with the current feeling of justice in the modern world. Moreover, in Italy, some military courts started to carry out the principle established by Italian Constitutional Court. Therefore, they have acknowledged the civil enforced execution on German assets there in Italy as compensation of war crimes damage committed by German soldiers in Greece, as a result of Greek tribunals' verdicts approved by Italian justice. As I said in my opening, the current legal question of Second World War's Nazi massacres is the compensation to the victims. As I said earlier, some people think that this issue could be resolved through monetary compensation for the damage to the victims. It means through the payment of amounts of money from Germany to the victim or their relatives by applying the common rules of the Italian Civil Code. I mean, just to be clear, the same rules with which we usually compensate the civil damage of a common car accident. Therefore, we would like to implement the same rules of law applied for ordinary civil settlements to a huge and extremely complicated phenomenon as a war. This reasoning, in my opinion, does not meet the demands of justice. Above all, it does not meet the demands of the war crimes victims. War crimes, such as those committed during the Second World War, have caused incredibly large damages, in most cases irreparable damages. Damages against people, against families, against communities, against lands, against states. Damages against states and against lands have been the subject of war reparations through the mechanism of international peace treaty. On the contrary, the damages suffered by individuals and against communities arising from war crimes were not considered by international peace treaties. Today, it is necessary to consider them. However, I think that the system of individual monetary compensation is not appropriate. First of all, it's not enough because I can't definitely cover all the victims and damages caused them. How can we give an individual compensation to more than 30 million of victims? We must find a method to achieve the target of compensation. Definitely, the damage caused by war crime or crime against humanity is a refundable damage, and that must be refunded. Anyway, I don't think that the appropriate instrument could be the civil code of the state. This kind of damage is included in an extraordinary context, exceptional, in a huge context, the war context. The most appropriate instrument are the international agreements. In addition to this aspect, another question is to be added, the important question. We must focus the reasoning on the victim and worry about her. Unfortunately, rather, this does not happen, and the victim is not sufficiently taken in account. In my judicial experience, I have prepared 17 cases and conducted more than 500 investigations for war crimes. I have met hundreds of victims, survivors and victim relatives. And I have questioned a lot of oppressors that were ex-Nazi soldiers accused of serious war crimes or crimes against humanity. Well, I noted that the victim's prevalent attitude was always to want to talk about their experience, to narrate to someone, to tell their experience to someone who could hear them, because they need to be heard. It was prevalent and important in them the answer at the question, why it happened? Why it happened to me? Why it happened there? Here, excuse me. Those are all questions that is not possible also through the traditional path of justice. Never penal justice, never civil justice. Even after a potential monetary compensation for the damage, these questions would remain unanswered, leaving the victim in the same uncomfortable condition in which he already is. Facing dreadful group tragedies, such as the destruction of entire villages, murder of thousands of people, facing a pain that is not even imaginable and therefore can't be understood. Facing that, I felt, as magistrate, as prosecutor, as man, the whole unsuitableness of my judicial role. I can't forget that a few years ago, during a conference in the Italian Senate, Liliana Segre, Holocaust survivor woman, still alive after has been held in Auschwitz camp, said, "After what I have seen, after what I have suffered, I don't care about the fate of Pripke or the other Nazi. I don't care if they have been sentenced or not. They are probably a person who suffered the Holocaust doesn't care so much to obtain an individual monetary compensation. A compensation that would not definitely repay never for the death of his relatives, never for the suffering endured. He probably cares about to get answers at the questions that arise ahead of him. Therefore, first of all, it is necessary to recover the dignity that the crime took away. And if this recovery of the dignity takes place through the work of the perpetrator of the crime, instead of only through the judge's sentence, it will be easier achieve this objective. In other words, I think that if today we want to talk about reparations for the victims of war crimes, like those occurred in Distomo 77 years ago, the path to follow is that of restorative justice. The definition of restorative justice is today used also in international rules as the European Directive 2012-29. Restorative justice means any process whereby the victim and the offender are enabled, if they freely consent, to participate actively in the resolution of matters arising from the criminal offense through the help of an impartial third party. By the restorative justice programs, the economic damage is not repaired. You are not in the area of reparation of items, broken or damaged things. The reparation is not the same that a monetary compensation. The restorative justice looks to the man, to the person. It respects the request at which the victim aims, and it tries to give answer to these questions in order to allow to find again the humanity that was lost with the crime. This means ever for the victim, ever for the criminal, to look to the future as righteous people, not diminished by the fault and injuries experienced. Definitely, on this context, cannot be neglected also the need for the state that caused so many destruction and individual pains to do something to prove tangibly his will to admit the offense. Certainly not at an individual level, but at the collective level. Where mass atrocity happened, clearly it is not possible to be able to process all those who should be condemned according to a traditional remuneration logic. This is true, obviously, for the individual civil compensation too. It's for this reason that international peace treaties after the war exist. Therefore, keeping this obvious observation in mind and considering the impossibility in reality after the 2012 sentence of the International Court of Justice in The Hague to obtain a compensation for a foreign country, I believe that the only really possible path would be to activate a way of restorative justice. This way should be agreed among the various states, Greece, Germany, Italy, France, etc., in order to allow individually those people victims of crimes to weigh out definitively by the psychological prism of their pain. Moreover, to make it possible to come to real norms of collective compensation, of course not complete, also because impossible to achieve, towards the communities affected by war crimes, by the countries who caused that destructions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ευχαριστούμε θερμά.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Paulis, for this really meaningful points he identified. And now I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Heike Hensel. Mrs. Hensel is the German politician. Mayor Distomo, Mr. Stathas mentioned her before about the discussion they had, her contribution before the members of the German Bundestag. She's a member of the Die Linke Party. She's a graduate of theology, and amongst other things, she has been working in the Association for the Promotion of Culture of Global Education. Allow me, if I'm not absolutely correct, with the full title of this organization. So, Mrs. Hensel, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, and Kalispera. Dear friends of the community of Distomo, dear Mr. Spanos, dear Mr. Papadopoulos, and dear Yanis Stathas, thank you very much for inviting me to attend this conference. It is an honor for me to be able to speak to you today, and allow me to convey my best regards to and solidarity to the survivors of the massacres of Distomo and Calabrita and their relatives. The discussion on compensation payments for German war crimes has gained nowadays new relevance due to the recent agreement between Germany and Namibia on compensation payments in view of the genocide committed against the Nama and Herero in the last century. Already 2 years ago, in 2019, we as Left Parliamentary Group had already organized a hearing on the question of compensation in the German parliament, in which both Yanis Stathas and Aristomenes Singelakis, among others, participated, and we introduced a new parliamentary motion on the issue of compensation payments and reparations in the parliament. Our work, of course, profits from the long-standing commitment in many parliamentary initiatives of my former colleague Norman Pech and my colleague Ulla Jelpke. And of course, we as MPs have all benefited from the valuable work of AK Distomo in Germany. Shortly before the 80th anniversary day of the invasion of Greece by the German Wehrmacht, a noteworthy debate took place in the German Bundestag on 25th March this year, and Mr. Papadopoulos already referred to this debate. As we all know, the 6th April marked the 80th anniversary of a day that meant nothing but annihilation, misery, and plunder for the Greek population, namely the invasion of Greece by the German Wehrmacht in 1941. More than 500,000 people lost their lives. Some 160,000 Greek women and men were murdered in the concentration camps, among them many Jews, Sinti, and Roma. And the Waffen-SS and the Wehrmacht burned 1,770 villages to the ground and committed countless massacres of civilians. Distomo, Calabrita, Llanos, Kesayani, and Linhares, I'm only choosing a few of these. Many names are examples of unimaginable crimes that are firmly etched in the memory of the Greek population, but still, unfortunately, far too little in Germany's collective memory. Therefore, I was criticizing in Parliament that the German federal government did not plan to hold an official commemoration event to mark this anniversary day. The way in which the German government approaches the issue of compensation payments for the relatives of the victims as well as reparation payments and the repayment of a forced loan by the Nazis worth billions, is completely unacceptable, not only morally, but also in legal terms. At the Debt Conference in London in 1953, final settlements were deferred until the conclusion of a peace treaty. Among those responsible for this, by the way, was long-time chairman of the Supervisory Board of Deutsche Bank, Hermann Josef Abs, one of National Socialist Germany's most influential banker. Germany must not be allowed to get away with the fact that the treaty concluded in 1990 was called the 2+4 Treaty and not a peace treaty at the time. The question of reparations, compensation and repayment of the forced loan has not been conclusively settled in law. Incidentally, this is also the conclusion reached by an expert opinion by the research services at the German Bundestag, which I myself commissioned in 2019. The expert opinion does not consider the position of the German government to be compelling, precisely because Greece never agreed to a waiver. The experts found that Germany's refusal to pay is by no means compelling, and that legal clarification should be sought voluntary. This is the idea, through the International Court of Justice in The Hague. The German government rejects such negotiations as well as judicial resolution on the grounds that a settlement had already been reached by the 2+4 Treaty in 1990. However, the treaty between the Federal Republic of Germany, the former GDR, the USA, the Soviet Union, France, and the UK does not even mention reparation payments. Moreover, Greece was not consulted. Is Germany's thumbs down justified? The expert opinion of the German Bundestag attests to an ambiguous legal situation. It finds that while the German government's position may be justifiable under international law, it is, I can repeat it, by no means compelling. In order to achieve legal certainty, the experts suggest instituting proceedings before the International Court of Justice in The Hague. And the German government can no longer, in my opinion, and there I have also a contradiction to Marco De Paulis, shy away from its historical responsibility and unilaterally declare these issues to be closed and not to pay compensation. After all, the question of reparations, individual compensation for the victims of war crimes, and repayment of a forced loan is an overall package, and the German government should negotiate this with the Greek government in close consultation with victims' organization. And I think we could do both, as you mentioned, the restorative justice, which is really needed, but also to speak about compensation. The final amount of money isn't the most important consideration here. What matters is that the German government finally backed down from its obstructionist stance and enter into negotiations. Court rulings such as those by the Greek Supreme Court dating back to 2000, which state that Germany is obligated to pay compensation to the relatives of the victims of Distomo, have been systematically ignored by the German governments in office since that time. I consider this to be a shameful state of affairs. Compensation payments are not a question of nationalism or division, but are about justice. They are a vital contribution to deepening German-Greek relations and do not, as is claimed in the recent debate in Parliament, risk sowing seeds of division. The perpetrators of these war crimes were never held to account. The very least we can do now, therefore, is to start talking about compensation. The Left Party is committed to ensuring that the German government settle its outstanding accounts with Greece, out of respect for the victims of German fascism. Based on a decision by the Greek Parliament, two Greek governments have since requested via note verbal that the German government enter into negotiations on the payment of reparations for war crimes and war damages committed. It was with this in mind that we tabled a motion in 2019 calling on the German government first to declare to the Greek government that the official demand for reparations for war crimes and war damages committed by the German fascist regime is recognized as legal by the Federal Republic of Germany. Second, to declare to Greece that the individual compensation of victims of German occupation crimes is recognized by the Federal Republic of Germany. Third, to enter into negotiations with the Greek government with the objective of concluding an agreement containing regulations concerning the group of recipients and the amount of compensation for victims, and to involve representatives of victims' organizations in these negotiations. Fourth, to undertake to enforce previous judgments of Greek and Italian courts that have confirmed claims for compensation made by Greek victims of German fascism. Fifth, to enter into negotiations with the Greek government with the objective of reaching an agreement governing the nature, extent, and conditions of the reparations for war damages and compensation to be paid. Sixth, to recognize in a binding manner the obligation to repay the forced loan. Seventh, to enter into negotiations on a mutually acceptable method for determining the present value of the bond, taking into account interest and compound interest, and to make the payment thereafter. And eighth, to inform the German Bundestag on a regular basis, at least every 6 months, about the progress of the negotiations. The fact that the most recent and remarkable debate in the Bundestag in March this year was initiated by the Greens parliamentary group with a motion that also advocates talks on compensation payments with the Greek government is mostly welcome. And it is a quite new position of the Green parliamentary group. In their motion, the deputies point out that from the Greek point of view, the question of reparations and compensation payments for the German war and the German occupation in Greece has not been conclusively settled at any time. The Greens call on the German government to submit concrete proposals to the Greek side as part of a new remembrance policy initiative. These included new way of dealing with the demand for repayment on the part of Greece with regard to the so-called forced loan, further civil society solidarity, and remembrance project and compensation payments, as well as individual compensation payments for the victims of Nazi crimes and their children, who have not yet been compensated or have been insufficiently compensated. Other proposals relate to the restitution and active support towards the Jewish communities of Greece, as well as future investments for the cities, villages, and regions that suffered severely and were completely or partially destroyed under German occupation, but have never been compensated for it so far. In contrast, all other parliamentary groups from the ruling Social Democratic Party, SPD, and Christian Democratic Party, CDU, to the Liberal Party and the right-wing party, AfD, rejected, unfortunately, these proposals and point mainly to the German-Greek Future Fund in particular. However, this fund for sure cannot and must not be a substitute for reparations, individual compensation, or the repayment of the forced loan. As you perhaps know, the Green Party is expected to be part of a next federal government after elections in September, and we as the left will do everything to remind the Greens then of their current demands and to increase the pressure to implement announcements. And I think a joint conference with members of the future government could make an important contribution to this, that we really get a step forward now. I see a kind of window of opportunity. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that I can attend commemorative events in Distomo again next year.
Χένσελ, σας ευχαριστούμε θερμά. Νομίζω ότι είναι
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hensel. I think the stance of yours vis-a-vis the official attitude by your government is very important. I hope that more voices like yours will come from your country. So, ending today's session, let's welcome Miltiadis Sfontouris, a lawyer, and let me say a few words about him. Mr. Sfontouris is a lawyer of Athens, member of Association of the Relatives of the Distomo Massacre victims, and he is here with us. Of course, he is an advisor to the municipality. He is a graduate of political science in Athens. Mr. Sfontouris, you have the floor. On behalf of the relatives and the survivors of the Distomo massacre, I'd like firstly to welcome you and thank you warmly for being here with us and honor us with your presence. As for my presentation, I will emphasize on the topic of this discussion, which is the political will for claiming the German war operations to Greece. And when talking about political will, I mean on behalf of the Greek government. And in order to avoid any misunderstanding, let me highlight the following. What matters and what I focus upon is not what various political parties say just before making it into government, but it's about what they do when they take office, what they have done till now. And the difference is huge, the difference between the words and the deeds, both in the course of time and in between parties and in a cross-party way. So when we have these very distressful anniversaries, we have the government making verbose announcements about the war operations. That it's a pending issue. They have committees appointed in order to investigate whether it's possible to claim for operations. Pay attention to that. They investigate the possibility of the war operations. For 80 years, the Greek government has been still investigating about that. But the more they investigate, the more they explore it, some others, and I'm talking about the survivors and the victims of the Holocaust, may help and take this one step forward. And the efforts by the victims and the relatives may cause problems in these international relations. That's why governments have built a huge wall in order to protect, to shield themselves. And this is Article 923 of the Judicial Procedures Code, according to which, in order to execute a decision against a foreign state, then the Minister of Justice has to sign that. We're talking about a permit that the minister may give or may not give just because of his free will. That's what the courts have said, the courts we went to, because the minister back then did not allow for the ruling on Distomo to be executed. Following this provision, 923, the government wants to protect the so-called national interest, which is the interest of the totality of our country vis-a-vis the interests of a community, realistically speaking. For them, the victims of the Holocaust represent just a group of population. This provision is extremely important if one tries to investigate it in the course of time. Also, in the context of today's discussion of our panel here, the political will. For the first time in 1938, under the Metaxas government, there has been such a concept introduced. The last government before the current one, which was also beyond the partisan context, restructured for the judicial procedures, but they forgot to remove this obsolete provision, which they preserved intact. One might say, is there hope after that? Of course, there's still hope. We have both the legal capabilities to promote our claims, and as a result, this will poke or boost the politicians to be more clear about that. What do I mean by that? We have the decision by the full assembly of the highest court, which in first seems to be negative, of the Supreme Court, apologies, because they rejected the application for the implementation of the Distomo ruling, which was our claim against the action of the Minister of Justice not to give his permission. But there's a very positive aspect in that decision by the Supreme Court. The judges said that regardless of the non-execution of that decision, a court ruling may be issued. Holocaust victims may resort to justice, get the ruling, and if the government, the Greek government, fails to give the permit in order for this execution to be implemented and executed in Greece, then, according to the Brussels Convention, this decision may be implemented in other territories, which means that, in other words, that we have to continue with our actions. We have to continue with our lawsuits. There are many lawsuits still pending and others that have not yet been initiated. So there is no way not to go on with them. And we have to move forward because we are the horses before the chariot. We are the ones to carry the political will forward. It's one thing having just one person knocking on the minister's door, and another thing having 81 or 181 individuals knocking on his door. There's also another barrier left by the Greek government in the long term, the so-called court stamp or judicial fee. It's a tax that we have to pay a priori in order to discuss any lawsuit. And we're talking about 8 per thousand of the money claimed. And that's a huge problem. This barrier was reintroduced in 2011. Until then, there was no reason for the case not to progress, not to be brought forward. Second point, there are court rulings, recent ones, 2020, twice, one in February 2021, according to which this provision has been ruled as anti-constitutional, which means there is a high probability that our lawsuits may move forward without paying the judicial fee or the stamp, translated. So, realistically speaking, we can push forward this frozen or non-existent political will as long as we proceed with the lawsuits in the case of Holocaust. This is the only way to drag the political leaders with us, along with us. Of course, we may go on with, let's say, we may take out of them some promises of law politics. For instance, we can push them in order to exempt the victims of Holocaust from paying this judicial fee. This is something they have already done in other cases. I mean, they did it under the pressure by the public. They did so for the case of victims of road accidents or labor accidents. They have provided exemption from the judicial fee in the case of alimonies. So it's something absolutely feasible. So we can push the government in order to lift the obligatory judicial fee. So with these thoughts of mine, and realistically speaking, I hope that next year we will have some good news to share with you. And with that, I'd like to thank you for honoring us with your presence. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Miltiadis Fontouris, for providing us with the legal aspect of the case. And ending, I think it would be great, Mayor Stathas, for you to take stock or to give us the epilogue of this session. So I think that we became wiser after today's talk. We became stronger because now we join forces with people from Italy, from Germany, from Calavrita, people from Greece, talking about the regional governor of Central Greece, Mr. Spanos. I think actually, I'm a bit emotional because I see all these people joining forces with us, both Miltos, both Thanasis. They both come from martyred villages, and we have common experiences. I feel really great, and I'd like to warmly thank Heike Hensel for the effort, the struggle they give in Germany. This is a beautiful struggle against Nazism, and it's a fight they give at all levels. And I feel really lucky to have such acquaintances, these beautiful people. I'd like to make a reference to late Manolis Glezos, as Thanasis Papadopoulos said. Manolis Glezos was an individual who put on a huge fight for that. And allow me to say that the claim started back in 1947. It was the Communist Party that was first to do so, we have to say that. But the claim itself became materialized after the National Council was appointed, and of course after the network of martyred cities and villages was created, because if it wasn't, because it was thanks to this network that the memory is kept still alive. And I'd like to say to Thanasis, who is the elderly, the network has made a huge effort. They put on a fight and they keep on doing that. And I want to publicly congratulate Thanasis for that, because it's extremely important for us, the people who come from these martyred cities and villages, to keep the flag high and honor the names of those massacred. The municipality of Kalavrita, to his honor, returned back the money from the German embassy, and we support him fully for that, because we cannot be bought by means of breadcrumbs. And I'm really proud of Thanasis. I want to say that publicly, and I fully support him, because Kalavrita have been swept, let's say, by the German embassy in the past. Congratulations, Thanasis. One last thing, and I'd like to close with that. There are 4 things we fight for from Germany. We're talking about the reparations, 280 billions, according to the calculations made by the committee of experts, according to international standards, because I was a member of both committees. I'm talking about the cross-party committees appointed in 2012 and 2014. I used to be an MP, because then in Syriza party we were in a revolutionary process. That's why Thanasis said that Adonis Roubakiotis told me about that, the then minister of the Samaras government, that even Syriza won't sign this decision, and he was right. The second one is the occupation loan, approximately 15 billion euros. For the first time, our country, since its establishment, was able to borrow money, to lend money, back in 1942. The third application, the third claim is the antiquities, the remnants that our experts failed to save. And now, in collaboration with Interpol, we may find them in private or collections. The third part has to do with private claims, like the case of Distomo victims, which is a unique case, because after the March 2012 court ruling, it was frozen because the ruling made justice to the Germans, because according to the ruling they just retaliated, and the network headed by Thanasis, we keep on fighting, and I'd like to wholeheartedly thank you all. Hopefully next year we will be all physically present in Distomo to honor our dead, and of course in Kalavrita and in other martyred cities and villages, the way we should. And even this way, this virtual way, we keep the memory alive. Faye, thank you very much for moderating the session. Thank you all for attending this discussion. Thank you. I'd like to thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Spanos, Mr. Papadopoulos, Mr. De Paulis, Mrs. Hensel, and of course, Mr. Sfodouris, and of course, you, Mayor. Have a beautiful evening. Good night. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you.